Hey guys, how you going? I have one person to thank tonight, and that is James. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And oh my goodness, I had the police turn up today at my front door. After this video, I'm about to do another video which I'm going to put up over on Patreon because I'm going to spit chips. Another word for let it fly. Okay guys, hang on. I'm going to read the rest of this clone document from the Black Vault. So we're up to actions during the current Bush administration. So this was obviously all written during the current Bush administration, at the time when Bush was... Okay. On August 9, 2001, President Bush announced that for the first time federal funds would be used to support research on human embryonic stem cells, but funding would be limited to existing stem cell lines. In the speech, President Bush stated that he strongly opposes human cloning. Although not mentioned specifically in the August 9th speech, a fact sheet on the White House website states that federal funds will not be used for the cloning of human embryos for any purpose. In his speech, President Bush announced his intention to name a President's Council chaired by Dr. Leon Kass of the University of Chicago to consider all of the medical and ethical ramifications of biomedical innovation. The President's Council on Bioethics was established for a period of up to 2 years by Executive Order 13237 on November the 28th, 2001. The White House announced the other 17 members of the Council on January 16th, 2002. Okay. So President Bush announced, right, that for the first time federal funds would be used to support research on human embryonic stem cells, but funding will be limited to that. In his speech, he stated strongly opposes human cloning, although not mentioned specifically in the August 9th speech. So are they contradicting themselves in this? Because in the speech, President Bush stated that he strongly opposes human cloning, although not mentioned specifically in the August 9th speech. Oh, maybe he left it out of the speech, saying he was going to allow federal funds to be used. Okay. The first topic addressed by the Council was human cloning. Although all Council members voted in opposition to reproductive cloning, they could not come to an agreement on articulating the precise nature of their objection, whether solely safety concerns or which of the various moral objections were most important. In an informal vote on the issue, the therapeutic cloning, about half of the 18 members of the Council voiced their support for the therapeutic use of human cloning. Dr. Kass proposed that the Council's final report reflect both the arguments supporting cloning for the purpose of medical treatment and those against. And last night, I want to correct myself, last night it was Worcester. Is it Worcester, Massachusetts? It's funny because I remember a movie called The Langolese, and yeah, one of the girl in that says that she was from Worcester, Mass, Worcester, Mass, and it just, yeah, I was trying to remember that at the time because I was sure it was the same pronunciation. But anyway, guys, sorry to ramble off there. At the June 2002 meeting, 9 Council members voted to support cloning for medical research purposes without a moratorium, provided a regulatory mechanism was established. Because one member of the Council had not attended the meetings and was not voting, the vote seemed to be 9 to 8 in favour of research cloning. However, the draft report sent to the Council members on June 28, 2002, indicated that 2 of the group of the 9 members changed their votes in favour of a moratorium. Both made it clear they have no ethical problem with cloning for biomedical research, but felt that a moratorium would provide time for additional discussion. The changed vote took many council members by surprise, and some on the council believed the moratorium option, as opposed to a ban, was thrown in at the last minute and did not receive adequate discussion. In addition, some on the council believe that the widely reported final vote of 10-7 in favour of a moratorium does not accurately reflect the fact that the majority of the council has no problem with the ethics of biomedical cloning. The final report, Human Cloning and Human Dignity, an Ethical Inquiry, was released on July the 11th, 2002. So there you go. They actually did admit something. In March 2001, the FDA sent letters to the research community stating that the creation of a human being using cloning is subject to FDA regulation under the Public Health Service Act and the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. FDA stated that such research could only occur when an investigational new drug application, IND, is in effect. Some legal scholars believe that there is no legal basis for the regulation of cloning by FDA. They find little evidence to support FDA's position that cloned human embryos are drugs. However, the biotechnology industry and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine believe the FDA has the authority to regulate cloning, and legislation is unnecessary because FDA regulation is preferred to any new action by Congress. On January the 18th, 2002, the National Academics released its report entitled Scientific and Medical Aspects of Human Reproductive Cloning. The panel recommended that the US ban human reproductive cloning. The panel was concerned for the safety of both the woman and the fetus and judged the procedure to be too dangerous for use in humans at the present time. The ban should be legally enforceable rather than voluntary and carry substantial penalties. The ban should be reconsidered in 5 years, but only if compelling new data on safety and efficacy are presented and a national dialogue on the social and ethical issues suggests that a review is warranted. However, the panel concluded that the research using SCNT to produce stem cells should be permitted because of the considerable potential for developing new therapies and advancing biomedical knowledge. This position is in agreement with the previous National Academy's report entitled Stem Cells and the Future of Regenerative Medicine, which was released on September the 11th, 2001. Well. Oh dear. So, this position is in agreement with the previous National Academy's report and was released on September the 11th, 2001. Wow, that is really interesting. Covered up as well. Well, it only the most massive thing in our history, in a lot of our history, happened on that day. Because of the current lack of federal regulation, the National Academies established in July 2004 the Committee on Guidelines for Human Embryonic Stem Cell Research to develop voluntary guidelines for deriving, handling, and using human embryonic stem cells. The stated position of the National Academies is that there should be a global ban on human reproductive cloning, and therefore the guidelines will focus only on therapeutic and research uses of human embryonic stem cells and somatic cell nuclear transfer. The committee released its guidelines for human embryonic stem cell research on April 26, 2005. The guidelines recommended that institutions conducting human embryonic stem cell research should establish oversight committees, including experts in the relevant areas of science, ethics, and law, as well as members of the public, to review all proposed experiments. The guidelines recommend that a national panel should be established to oversee the issue in general on a continuing basis. However, the guidelines states that certain types of research should not be permitted at the present time. 1. Culture of any intact embryo regardless of derivation method for more than 14 days, and 2. The insertion of any embryonic stem cells into a human embryo, or the insertion of human embryonic stem cells into a non-human primate embryo, which I also think they have done, whether it be in secret or whether it be in, I don't know. In addition, animals in which human embryonic stem cells have been introduced at any stage of development should not be allowed to breed. The document also provides guidance on informed consent of donors and states that there should be no financial incentives in the solicitation or donation of embryos, sperm, eggs, or somatic cells for research purposes. The US Supreme Court has recognized in past cases certain personal rights as being fundamental and protected from government interference. Some legal scholars believe a ban on human cloning may be struck down by the Supreme Court because it would infringe upon the right to make reproductive decisions, which is protected under the constitutional right to privacy and the constitutional right to liberty. Other scholars do not believe that non-coital asexual reproduction, such as cloning, would be considered a fundamental right by the Supreme Court. A ban on human cloning research may raise other constitutional issues, scientists' right to personal liberty and free speech. In the opinion of some legal scholars, any government limits on the use of cloning in scientific inquiry or human reproduction would have to be narrowly tailored to further a compelling state interest. Whoa, what happened there? Okay, sorry guys, I've just lost it completely. Bear with me. Okay, we were up a bit further than that. Sorry guys, I had to pause it and I lost. There you go. State laws on cloning. As of April the 18th, 2006, 15 states have passed laws pertaining to human cloning. Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Indiana, Iowa, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Dakota, and Virginia have all enacted measures to prohibit reproductive cloning. Arizona and Missouri have passed laws that addresses the use of public funds for cloning. In addition, Louisiana has enacted legislation prohibiting reproductive cloning, but the law expired in July 2003. 6 of the states also prohibit cloning for research or therapeutic purposes: Arkansas, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota. The Virginia law may also prohibit therapeutic cloning. Sorry guys, my cat's just gone nuts. But it may be unclear because the law does not define the term human being, which is used in the definition of human cloning. The California and New Jersey laws specifically permit cloning for research purposes. The Rhode Island law is silent on therapeutic cloning and cloning for research purposes, and has a sunset date of July the 7th, 2010. What is a sunset date? If you know, put it in the comments below. Congressional action. The 109th Congress addressed the issue of cloning and embryo research in the Labour, HHS and Education Appropriations Act of 2006 by again including the Dickey Amendment, which has banned since FY 1996 almost all publicly funded human embryo research. In addition, the Science, Justice and Commerce Appropriations Act 2006 bars the Patent and Trademark Office from spending money to issue patents on claims directed to or encompassing a human organism. This restriction, which was first included in the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2004 and in the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2005, could potentially deter human embryo research and stem cell research because researchers might not be able to claim ownership of their work. HR 810, Castle. The Stem Cell Research Enhancement Act passed the House on May the 24th, 2005 on a vote of 238 to 194. It would amend the Public Health Service Act and direct the Secretary of HHS to conduct and support research that utilises human embryonic stem cells, regardless of the date on which the stem cells were derived from a human embryo. Stem cell lines derived after enactment must meet ethical guidelines established by the NIH. Only embryos that were originally created for fertility treatment purposes and in excess of clinical need are eligible for stem cell derivation. Only embryos that the individuals seek fertility treatments have determined will not be implanted in a woman and will be discarded are eligible for stem cell derivation. Written consent is required for embryo donation. The Secretary, in consultation with the Director of NIH, shall promulgate guidelines 60 days after enactment. No federal funds shall be used to conduct research on unapproved stem cell lines. The Secretary shall annually report to Congress about stem cell research. A companion bill, S471 Spectre, was introduced on February 28, 2005. On June 29, 2006, Senate Majority Leader Bill First announced that an agreement on scheduling a vote in the Senate on stem cell research legislation more than a year after the House passed H.R. 810. Under the agreement, amendments were not allowed on a package of 3 bills. Each needed 60 votes to pass. H.R. 10 S2754 Sanatorum, the Alternative Pluripotent Stem Cell Therapies Enhancement Act, and S3504 Sanatorum, the Fetus Farming Prohibition Act, S3504, does not address the issue of stem cell research, but rather the use of tissue from later stage embryo or fetus. The second bill in the agreement, S2754, was introduced on May the 5th, 2006. It would amend the Public Health Service Act, adding a new section 409J. Alternative human pluripotent stem cell research. The bill would require the Secretary of HHS to develop techniques for the isolation, derivation, production, or testing of stem cells that are capable of producing all or almost all of the cell types of the developing body and may result in improved understanding of treatment for diseases and other adverse health conditions, but are not derived from a human embryo. Within 90 days of enactment, the Secretary would be required to 1. Provide guidance concerning the next steps required for additional research, 2. Prioritise research with the greatest potential for near-term clinical benefit, and 3. Take into account techniques outlined by the President's Council on Bioethics and any other appropriate techniques and research. The Secretary would be required to prepare and submit to the appropriate committees of Congress an annual report describing the activities and research conducted. The bill authorises such sums as may be necessary for FY 2007 through FY 2009. A companion bill, H.R. 5526 Bartlett, was introduced on June 6, 2006. The third bill, S3504, was introduced on June 13, 2006. It would amend the Public Health Service Act to prohibit the solicitation or acceptance of human fetal tissue obtained from a human pregnancy that was deliberately initiated to provide such tissue, or tissue obtained from a human embryo or fetus that was implanted in the uterus of a non-human animal. The bill was referred to the Senate Health, Education, Labour and Pensions Committee. The companion bill H.R. 5719, Weldon, was introduced on June 29, 2006 and referred to the House Energy and Commerce Committee. I wonder what that's got to do with cloning. The House Energy and Commerce Committee. Okay, on July the 18th, 2006, the Senate passed H.R. 810, S2754 and S3504, On the same day, the House passed S3504, but failed to pass S2754 with the required 2/3 of the vote. It was 273 to 154. On July the 19th, 2006, President Bush signed S3504 and vetoed HR 810, the first veto of his 6 years in office. An attempt in the House on July 19th to override the veto of HR 810 did not receive the required 2/3 of the vote. It was 235 to 193. HR 1357 Dave Weldon, the Human Cloning Prohibition Act of 2005, was introduced on March 17, 2005. HR 1357 amends Title 18 of the United States Code and will ban the process of human cloning as well as the importation of any product derived from an embryo created via cloning. Under this measure, cloning could not be used for reproductive purposes or for research on therapeutic purposes, which would have implications for stem cell research. HR 1357 includes a criminal penalty of imprisonment of not more than 10 years and a civil penalty of not less than $1 million. HR 1357 is essentially identical to the measure which passed the House in the 107th Congress, HR 2505, and the 108th Congress, HR 534. HR 1357 was referred to the House Committee on the Judiciary. A companion bill, S658 Brownback, was introduced on March 17, 2005. It is similar to HR 1357 except that 1. It does not contain the ban of importation of products derived from the therapeutic cloning, and 2. It amends Title 4 of the Public Health Service Act instead of Title 18 of the United States Code. S658 includes a criminal penalty of imprisonment of not more than 10 years and a civil penalty of not less than $1 million. It requires GAO to conduct a study to assess the need, if any, for changes of the prohibition on cloning in light of new developments in medical technology, the need for SCNT to produce medical advances, current public attitudes and prevailing ethical views on the use of SCNT, and potential legal implications of research in SCNT. The study is to be completed within 4 years of enactment. S658 has been referred to the Senate Health, Education, Labour and Pensions Committee. S876 Hatch, the Human Cloning Ban and Stem Cell Research Protection Act of 2005, was introduced on April 21st, 2005. A similar bill, HR 1822 Bono, the Human Cloning Ban and Stem Cell Research Protection Act of 2005, was introduced on April 26, 2005. S876 amends Title 18 of the United States Code, and HR 1822 amends the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. Both bills would ban human reproductive cloning but allow cloning for medical research purposes, including stem cell research. S876 and HR 1822 include a criminal penalty of imprisonment of not more than 10 years. S876 has a civil penalty of not less than $1 million. HR 1822 has a civil penalty not to exceed $10 million. S876 requires the Comptroller General to prepare a series of 4 reports within 1 year of enactment. The first report describes the actions taken by the Attorney General to enforce the prohibitions on human reproductive cloning, the personnel and resources used to enforce the prohibition, and a list of any violations of the prohibition. A second report describes similar state laws that prohibit human cloning and actions taken by the state's Attorney General to enforce the provisions of any similar state law, along with a list of violations. A third report describes the coordination of enforcement actions among the federal, state and local governments. A fourth report describes the laws adopted by foreign countries related to human cloning. HR 1822 requires a similar set of 3 reports to be prepared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. S876 and HR 1822 would amend the Public Health Service Act by requiring that human SCNT be conducted in accordance with the ethical requirements such as informed consent, examination by an institutional review board, and protections for safety and privacy contained in Subpart A of 45 CFR, Part 46, or Parts 50 and 56 of 21 CFR. S876 and HR 1822 have a prohibition on conducting SCNT on fertilised human eggs. How do you say that? Oocytes or oocytes. And both state that unfertilised blastocysts shall not be maintained after more than 14 days from its first cell division, aside from storage at temperatures less than 0 degrees centigrade. S876 and HR 1822 stipulate that a human egg may not be used in SCNT research unless the egg is donated voluntarily with the informed consent of the woman donating the egg. Both bills also specify that human eggs or unfertilised blastocysts may not be acquired, received, or otherwise transferred for valuable consideration if the transfer affects interstate commerce. In addition, SCNT may not be conducted in a laboratory in which human eggs are subject to assisted reproductive technology treatments or procedures such as in vitro fertilisation for the treatment of infertility. Violation of these provisions in S876 and HR 1822 regarding ethical requirements would result in a civil penalty of not more than $250,000. S876 has been referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee. HR 1822 has been referred to the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Supporters of a ban on human cloning, such as that contained in HR 1357, argue that a partial ban on human cloning like the one contained in S876 would be impossible to enforce. Critics of the ban on human cloning argue that SCNT creates a clump of cells rather than an embryo, and that the ban would curtail medical research and prevent Americans from receiving life-saving treatments created overseas. Ethical and social issues. The possibility of using cloning technology not just for therapeutic purposes, but also for reproducing human beings raises profound moral and ethical questions. As previously mentioned, the Bush administration and the national academies have made their positions clear. In July 2002, the President's Council on Bioethics issued its report, Human Cloning and Human Dignity, which contained 2 opinions and sets of recommendations, one of the 10-7 majority and one of the minority. The majority and minority both opposed reproductive cloning. It was on the topic of therapeutic cloning, which the majority opposed and the minority favoured, that the council was split. At the June 20, 2002 meeting, 9 of 17 council members voted to support cloning for medical research purposes without a moratorium, providing a regulatory mechanism was established. Because one member of the council had not attended the meetings and was not voting, the votes seemed to be 9-8 in favour of research cloning. However, draft versions of the council report sent to council members on June 28, 2002 indicated that 2 of the group of 9 members had changed their votes in favour of a moratorium. We've read this. Both made it clear they have no ethical problem with cloning for biomedical research, but felt that a moratorium would provide time for additional discussion. The change vote took many council members by surprise, and some on the council believed that the moratorium option, as opposed to a ban, was thrown in at the last minute and did not receive adequate discussion. In addition, some on the council believed the widely reported final vote of 10-7 in favour of a moratorium does not accurately reflect the fact that the majority of council has no problem with the ethics of biomedical cloning. Transcripts of the council meetings and papers developed by staff for discussions during council meetings can be found at http://www.bioethics.gov. just in case you want to know. SS Hall. President's Bioethics Council delivers science. Oh, that's all the references. A predecessor to the President's Council, the National Bioethics Advisory Commission (NBAC) recommended, in Cloning Human Beings, the continuation of a moratorium on federal funding for reproductive purposes, with a call for voluntary compliance from the private sector. It further recommended the enactment of legislation with a 3 to 5 year sunset clause banning cloning for reproductive purposes. However, made it clear that all measures taken should be carefully written so as not to interfere with other important areas of scientific research. Various other organisations, individuals and councils have issued opinions and reports on cloning as well. Some, such as the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, oppose human cloning for any purpose. The cloning procedure is so dehumanising that some scientists want to treat the resulting human beings as subhuman, creating them solely so they can destroy them for their cells and tissues. Others, such as a group of 40 Nobel laureates, former First Lady Nancy Reagan, and former President General Ford, would allow regulated cloning for therapeutic purposes, but disallow it for reproductive ones. Still others, such as okay, I said it twice there, such as Dr. Severino, Antonori, and Clonaid, favour cloning for reproductive purposes and even claim to have created human clones via SCNT. The human cloning debate centres around a number of different ethical and pragmatic issues. Exploration of these issues reveals variation in ethical and moral, as well as factual beliefs. The following discussion breaks down the argument surrounding human cloning according to these issues, demonstrating both the complexity of the issues and the points of resonance among the groups. Issues involved in cloning for reproductive purposes. Sorry guys. As Clonaid advertised and the President's Council acknowledged, supporters of reproductive cloning favour it because it might allow infertile couples to have genetically related children, enable families to avoid genetic disease in their genetically related children, facilitate the replication of specific persons such as lost loved ones, or to create ideal transplant donors. Oh my... no. I've heard this before. Allowing infertile couples and to pretty much genetically design their own children. And they were talking about this years ago on TV and news. But to create ideal transplant donors. So what are you doing? Creating people to kill them for their body parts. Anyway, okay. Likewise, the NBAC recognised that some of the principles that underlie these purposes are a presumption in favour of individual liberty, that human reproduction is particularly personal and should remain free of constraint, and as a society we ought not limit the freedom of scientific inquiry. However, for a number of other reasons, the idea of cloning for reproductive purposes is presently rejected by most groups and organisations, including the President's Council and NBAC. Of the groups and individuals listed in the Ethical and Social Issues section, only Clonaid and Dr. Antonori favour reproductive cloning at this time. Despite the apparent uniformity of views rejecting reproductive cloning, there is a great deal of variation in the lines of reasoning underlying such objections. Procreation without conjugal union. According to the USCCB, Donenvitae, instructs that attempted or hypothesis for obtaining a human being without any connection with sexuality through twin fission, cloning, or parthenogenesis are to be considered contrary to the moral law, since they are in opposition to the dignity of both human procreation and of the conjugal union. The objection to reproductive cloning, that procreation should be limited to conjugal unions, is not supported by most groups. If accepted, it would lead to rejection of further forms of assisted reproduction, such as in vitro fertilisation, IVF. Of the groups and individuals listed above, only UCCSB cites the need for a conjugal union as a persuasive argument against reproductive cloning. Safety. The most agreed upon objection to human reproductive cloning is one of safety. The President's Council on Bioethics concluded that given the high rates of morbidity and mortality in the cloning of other mammals, we believe that cloning to produce children would be extremely unsafe, and that attempts to produce a cloned child would be highly unethical. I still think they've already done it. The National Bioethics Advisory Commission reached a consensus in its objection to reproductive cloning because current scientific information indicated that this technique was not safe in humans. The National Academies agrees with this line of reasoning, given that animal experimentation has demonstrated that only a small percentage of attempts are successful. Many of the clones die during gestation, and newborn clones are often abnormal or die. While these objections about safety are widely held, they may be temporary in nature. As research advances, it may become less risky, and thus some may find it less objectionable to attempt reproductive human cloning. And I believe they've been trying to do that for years. They've been trying to make it seem normal. As I said, it was on TV years ago that you could genetically pick whether you wanted a boy or a girl, or unlike concerns about safety, other types of objections, while not so widely held, may be more lasting because they are not likely to be alleviated by scientific progress. These tend to be philosophical in nature. These concerns listed in the following paragraphs have been acknowledged by the President's Council, NBAC, and UCSSB, and the National Academies. According to the President's Council, different council members give varying moral weight to the following different concerns. Only the UCSSB found the concerns persuasive in total. Identity. Some objections to reproductive cloning are based upon fears that cloned children will have difficulty with their identities, because each will be genetically virtually identical to a human being who's already lived, and because the expectations for their lives may be shadowed by constant comparisons to the life of the original. These concerns are dismissed by others, who point out that this argument rests largely on the crudest genetic determinism. They cite both the effect and that environment plays on individual development, and the lack of difficulty with identity experienced by naturally occurring identical twins. Commodification. Other philosophical objections have to do with the fear that cloned children might come to be considered more like products of a designed manufacturing process than gifts whom their parents were prepared to accept as they are. Such an attitude toward children could also contribute to increased commercialization and industrialization of human procreation. This in turn may fuel a new eugenics in which parents select not only whether to have a child, but which child to have. As I said, it's already been discussed. Others point out that these types of concerns were raised about most forms of assisted reproduction, such as in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which have not led to objectification. In addition, if being born is considered to be a benefit to the one born, to the extent that the technology is used to benefit the child, no objection of the child takes place. Familial relationships. A complicated lineage also has been introduced as an objection to reproductive cloning. By confounding and transgressing the natural boundaries between generations, cloning would strain the social ties between them. Fathers could become twin brothers to their sons. Mothers could give birth to their genetic twins, and grandparents would also be the genetic parents of their grandchildren. Oh, how confusing is that? Genetic relation to only one parent might produce special difficulties for family life. Others point out that children born through assisted reproductive technologies may also have complicated relationships to genetic, gestational and rearing parents. Yet there is no evidence that confusion over family roles has harmed children born through assisted reproductive technologies, although the subject has not been carefully studied. So they're saying that and they haven't even studied it. That's a great way to go. Societal view of children. Concerns have been voiced about the effects of cloning on society. Cloning to produce children would affect not only the direct participants, but also the entire society that allows or supports this activity. Even if practiced on a small scale, it could affect the way society looks at children and set a precedent for future non-therapeutic interventions into the human genetic endowment or novel forms of control by one generation over the next. This objection is rejected by others who argue that people can and do adapt in socially redeeming ways to new technologies. A child born through somatic cell nuclear transfer could be loved and accepted like any other child. Issues involving cloning for therapeutic purposes. Cloning for therapeutic purposes is more broadly supported than reproductive cloning, and the issues involved are somewhat different. The safety concerns of reproductive cloning do not apply in therapeutic cloning, placing much of the scientific community, such as the National Academies, in favour of it. In addition, the NBAC, a minority of the President's Council, the group of Nobel laureates Nancy Reagan and Gerald Ford, also generally support cloning for therapeutic purposes. Opponents include a majority of the President's Council and the USCCB. Relief of human suffering and moral status of cloned embryos. The central debate over therapeutic cloning rests on the relative weight ascribed to potential research benefits and that ascribed to cloned embryos themselves. All sides have genetically agreed that research involving cloning may generate biomedical advancements that relieve human suffering. As described in the President's Council, the research may offer uniquely useful ways of investigating and possibly treating many chronic, debilitating diseases and disabilities, providing relief to millions. Yet a majority of council members were dissuaded from the research, arguing that if we permit this research to proceed, we will effectively be endorsing the complete transformation of nascent human life into nothing more than a resource tool. Similar arguments are made by the USCCB. I have a tickle in my throat, sorry guys. The Council's minority offered an opposing viewpoint. We believe there are sound moral reasons for not regarding the embryo in its earliest stages as a moral equivalent to a human person, but rather as having a developing and intermediate moral worth that commands our special respect. The minority based its opinion on the fact that the blastocyst stage, the one useful for stem cell research, for example, the cells are still undifferentiated and could still be split and develop into two separate twinned embryos, suggesting that the earliest stage embryo is not yet an individual. Furthermore, they note that the possibility for the development of a human child from a cloned embryo would require its transference to a uterus, as is currently the case with IVF. IVF often results in the creation of embryos that remain unimplanted, and is permitted in the United States. For all of the above reasons, the Council minority, NBAC, Nancy Reagan, Gerald Ford, and the Nobel laureates support therapeutic cloning. In July 2004, Dr. Paul McHugh, a member of the President's Council who objects to the destruction of human embryos and who had voted the Council majority for a moratorium on cloning for biomedical research, argued in a medical journal article that SCNT resembles the tissue culture and that the products of SCNT should be available for research once regulations are in place to ensure that SCNT is conducted ethically. At the December 2004 Council meeting, Dr. William Hurlbut, these names, Hurlbut, I don't know. Another council member who objects to the destruction of human embryos and voted for the moratorium made a proposal to explore the possibility of using SCNT in combination with techniques to ensure that the group of cells created cannot give rise to human life but can generate embryonic stem cells. Dr. Hurlbut explained, using the technique of nuclear transfer, it may be possible to produce embryonic stem cells within a limited cellular system that is biologically and morally akin to a complex tissue culture, and thereby bypass moral concerns about the creation and disruption of human embryos. Some have criticised Dr. Hurlbut's proposal to create something that is not an embryo, yet generates embryonic stem cells, as one focused on a semantic issue, not a scientific one. Others have lauded Dr. Hurlbut's proposal as potential scientific solution to a moral problem. Included among them is Dr. Leon Cass, the chair of the council and well-known opponent of embryo destruction, who said the proposal raises the possibility that the partisans of scientific progress and the defenders of nascent human life can go forward in partnership without anyone having to violate things they hold dear. And I would disagree with that. Deliberate creation for use, destruction. A second set of considerations underlying the debate to do with moral aversion to the prospect of creating life in order to destroy it. As the majority of the President's Council pointed out, cloning for therapeutic purposes requires the creation of human life expressly and exclusively for the purpose of its use in research that necessarily involves its destruction, transforming nascent human life into nothing more than a resource tool. The USCCB agrees with this characterization. The council minority countered that the embryos would not be created for destruction, but for use in the service of life and medicine. Further, the practice of sacrificing the life of the unborn in order to save the life of the pregnant woman, while not a moral parallel to the case of using cloned embryos for biomedical research, shows that there is some moral precedent for subordinating nascent human life to more developed human life. The NBAC, Nancy Reagan, Gerald Ford and the Nobel laureates agree with this characterization. Moral harm or benefit to society. The effect of therapeutic cloning upon society has been debated by opponents and proponents alike. The President's Council majority fear negative effects, such as the subjugation of weak members of the society or genetic manipulation of a developing life. As much as we like to alleviate suffering now and to leave our children in a world where suffering can be more effectively relieved, we also want to leave them in a world that honours moral limits, that respects all life, whether strong or weak, and that refuses to secure the good of some human beings by sacrificing the lives of others. Approving therapeutic cloning would harm society by crossing the boundary from sexual to asexual reproduction, thus approving in principle the genetic manipulation and control of nascent human life. US CCB also shares this point of view. Counter-arguments have been made by those who note that historically scientific inquiry has been protected and even encouraged because of the great societal benefit the public recognises in maintaining the sanctity of knowledge and the value of intellectual freedom. In addition, they note that cloning is replication rather than transformation. In an important sense, cloning is not the most radical thing on the horizon. Much more significant would be the ability to actually alter or manipulate the genome of offspring, which could then lead to a child being born with characteristics other than what it would have had. Council minority NBAC, Nancy Reagan, Gerald Ford and the Nobel laureates share this perspective. Going too far or drawing appropriate limitations. Some, such as the majority of the President's Council and USCCB, believe that policies allowing therapeutic cloning would create a slippery slope, opening the door to other moral hazards such as cloning to produce children, or research on later stage embryos and fetuses. Others, such as the Council minority, NBAC, Nancy Reagan, Gerald Ford, and the Nobel laureates, believe that it is possible to circumscribe acceptable practices with good policy. Both the federal government and the states already regulate the researchers' methods in order to protect the rights of research subjects and community safety. Government might regulate the secure handling of embryos, licensing and prior review of research projects, the protection of egg donors and the provision of equal access to benefits. Egg procurement. The topic of egg procurement came to the public's attention in November 2005 with allegations that some human eggs used in South Korean scientist Dr. Hwang's laboratory had been obtained under coercive conditions. The alleged situation in Dr. Hwang's laboratory raises the issue of coercion, both because subordinate women in the laboratory allegedly donated eggs and because some women were allegedly paid for their eggs. A 2002 study conducted by a University of Pennsylvania student raised the issue of insufficient information, finding that a number of programs seeking donor eggs to reproductive purposes were not upfront about the risks involved in egg retrieval. The wide consensus regarding the need for informed consent necessarily implies similar consensus on the need for an information-rich, coercion-free method of obtaining eggs. However, there is some disagreement on the specifics of whether payment for eggs necessarily constitutes coercion. It does. The prospect of paying women for their eggs, which has been debated in the context of seeking donor eggs both for reproductive purposes, for example to enable women who do not produce their own eggs to become pregnant, and for research purposes, is not unheard of in the United States. According to a 2000 study by the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, some IVF programs reportedly offer as much as $5,000 for one egg retrieval cycle, though $2,500 appear to be more common amount. Offers of much higher amounts, $50,000 to $100,000, have been reported elsewhere. Dr. Hwang's laboratory reportedly made payments of $1,400 to each woman who donated eggs. Payments are not illegal in the United States, nor were they illegal in South Korea at the time Dr. Hwang's laboratory allegedly made them. The questions are, is payment for egg donation ever acceptable, and if so, what amount is appropriate? Well, I don't think they should be paying people, and I don't think they should be doing it at all. But paying people, if you think of a poor person, they're going to do it for the money. Anyone who's desperate would do it for the money. Not anyone, but a lot of people would. Several arguments have been put forward in favour of payment for egg donation, many focused on donation for reproductive purposes. First, some have argued that payment creates incentives to increase the number of egg donors, thus facilitating research and benefiting infertile couples. Second, some reason that payment for eggs gives women parity with sperm donors, who may be compensated for donating gametes at a lower rate, given they require a much less involved procedure. Third, some allege that fairness dictates that women who donate eggs ought to be able to benefit from their action. Fourth, some claim that pressures created by the financial incentives may be no greater than those experienced by women asked to make altruistic egg donations for relatives or friends, and may thus not rise to the level of coercion. These are the types of arguments that led ASRM to recommend in 2000 that sums of up to $5,000 may be appropriate for typical egg donation, while sums of up to $10,000 may possibly be justified if there are particular difficulties a woman must endure to make her donation. Several arguments have also been put forth against payment for egg donation. First, some voice fears that payment might lead to the exploitation of women, particularly poor women, and the commodification of reproductive tissues. Second, some have argued that payment for eggs for research purposes might undermine public confidence in endeavours such as human ESR. Arguments such as these have prompted both the NAS and the PCBE to recommend that women not be paid for donating their eggs for research purposes. It also led the PCBE to note that in theory there is the possibility that eggs could be procured from ovaries harvested from cadavers, which might at least alleviate concerns related to coercion. Well, you can't get their consent, can you? And I think you should be leaving cadavers alone and not trying to recreate. Oh, are you kidding me? It is worth noting that a woman may choose to undergo egg retrieval for her own reproductive purposes, which would effectively take the process of egg procurement out of the research arena and avoid the question of payment entirely. For example, this could be an option for a woman seeking IVF because her fallopian tubes are blocked. Types of restrictions. One final set of arguments centre around the types of actions that the government may take with respect to therapeutic and/or reproductive cloning. These include permitting, regulating, funding, discouraging, and temporary or permanently banning the practices. As a starting point, NBAC offers, in the United States, governmental policies that prohibit or regulate human actions require justification because of a general presumption against governmental interference in individual activities. As may be expected, the opinions regarding appropriate courses of action are largely linked to points of view about the appropriateness of the various endeavours. The most permissive approach available, permitting cloning with no restrictions, is not supported by any of the individuals or organisations referenced herein. By contrast, the next most permissive approach, regulating cloning, is supported by the council minority, NBAC, Nancy Reagan, General Ford and the Nobel laureates, as appropriate for therapeutic cloning, so as to enable it to continue in accordance with socially accepted scientific research practices. As summarised by the council minority, we believe that this research could provide relief to millions of Americans and that the government should therefore support is, with sensible limits imposed by regulation. Did I just read that completely wrong? We believe that this research could provide relief to millions of Americans and that the government should therefore support is, within sensible limitations imposed by regulation. Oh, yep. I think. I'm getting tired now. A voluntary prohibition, the third most permissive approach, was recommended by NBAC as the appropriate immediate response to reproductive cloning by the private sector. NBAC called for an immediate request to all firms, clinicians, investigators, and professional societies in the private and non-federally funded sectors to comply voluntarily with the intent of the federal moratorium. What's a moratorium? Isn't that in a morgue? A moratorium? No, I don't know what it is. I can't remember. As a longer-term approach, NBAC recommended the fourth most permissive approach, a temporary ban on reproductive cloning. Federal legislation should be enacted to prohibit anyone from attempting, whether in a research or clinical setting, to create a child through somatic cell nuclear transfer. It is critical, however, that such legislation include a sunset clause to ensure that Congress will review the issue after a specified time period, 3 to 5 years, in order to decide whether the prohibition continues to be needed. Readers may be interested to note that if enacted in 1997, when NBAC's report was published, a 5-year ban on reproductive cloning would have expired in 2002. The National Academies also recommended a ban on reproductive cloning and did not call it temporary, but did add that it should be reconsidered every 5 years. On the topic of therapeutic rather than reproductive cloning, a majority of the council recommended a temporary moratorium as the proper approach, because it would reaffirm the principle that science can progress while upholding the community's moral norms, and would therefore reaffirm the community's moral support for science and biomedical technology. The most restrictive approach to cloning, a permanent ban, was proposed by the council minority and majority, and Nancy Reagan as appropriate for reproductive cloning. By permanently banning cloning to produce children, this policy gives force to the strong ethical verdict against it, unanimous in the council and wisely supported by the American people. This approach is also favoured by the USCCB, not only for reproductive cloning, but also for therapeutic cloning. One related issue, that of the use of federal funding for the therapeutic cloning, has also been discussed. No proposals have been made by any of the groups of individuals listed above for the use of federal funding or for reproductive cloning. Opponents of funding therapeutic cloning, such as the Council majority, have expressed concern that use of federal funding for therapeutic cloning would put the federal government in the novel and unsavoury position of mandating the destruction of nascent human life. Proponents of federal funding for therapeutic cloning, such as the Council minority, NBAC, Nancy Reagan, General Ford, and the Nobel laureates, cite as support the advances that might be powered by the infusion of federal dollars into the research, as well as the ethical protections that would attach with the money. There you go, and it's done. I think they've already been doing it. I really do. And for a long time, I think this is all smoke and mirrors. Smoke and mirrors. That's all it is. I'd like to see updated versions now from 2020 and see where they're at. Anyway, what do you think, guys? Let me know down below. And if you want to join me over on Patreon, it's going to be interesting. Anyway, okay, guys, I hope you have a good one. And the link will be down below. And take care and stay safe and stay calm. And I'll talk to you soon. Okay, guys. Bye.